Welcome back to Celebrity Radio. It's Alex Belfield talking to some of my favourite people and some of the world's biggest stars. And then there are those people who change the world with their books and their TV shows and, of course, their imagination. Peter Robinson is one of them. How are you?
Hello there.
So nice to talk to you. What's fascinating about you is your mind must be this big cavern of infinite opportunities. You seem to find no end to your imagination and to create these ongoing stories through this wonderful Inspector Alan Banks, which of course is your most famous character. What is it like being you? Is it torturous to be so sort of thinking all the time?
Sometimes, especially given that I write crime fiction, so a lot of my thoughts can be on the morbid side. But I mean, I think, I always did have a bit of a morbid imagination, so I turned it into something useful by, creating books out of it.
What I think is really interesting about you is where you're from, Armley in Leeds. I just spent a couple of years at BBC Radio Leeds, and whilst I was up there, I covered the Crossbow Cannibal story, and then, of course, the Yorkshire Ripper. Do you think that's something to do with it, that area particularly seems to have some of the most extraordinary crime stories in real life?
There have been some very extraordinary crime stories from Leeds, Bradford, and of course Manchester area, which is not far away. The strange thing about Armley is it seems to be a sort of hotbed for writers. I mean, I went to the same children's library there as Alan Bennett and Barbara Taylor Bradford, although they're older than me, so I never met them. But, we all used the same library and lived in the same area, which is really kind of odd.
It's such a fabulous place. I had a great time up there. And of course, the thing about it is the humour, and we really get to see that in your books. There's a lot of negativity there. There's a lot of awful stuff going on, but there's an underlying sarcasm, which of course is very Yorkshire, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm glad you see that, because not everyone sees the humour. I mean, I think a lot of the Americans just don't get it at all. But it is a very northern thing. It's a very droll, dark kind of humour, which also works well with the police, because when you do a job like emergency or police or fireman, you do develop almost a protective kind of black humour, that you see things as funny that other people would see as awful.
I learned that when I worked with the Army in BFBS. The sort of drollery is the key to sort of surviving the horrific stuff that goes on, really. And that is the backbone of your books. There has to be some devastation somewhere. How does that sit with you in terms of your life and your lifestyle? Does it ever bring you down?
No, it doesn't bring me down. I mean, I suppose at worst it may cause nightmares every now and then. But as I say, I tend to have the kind of imagination that often seeks out the worst possibility. It's debilitating sometimes. But I'll go on walks in Yorkshire and come to a beautiful, desolate place and think, what a wonderful place to find a body. Not everybody would do that, I think.
So where does it come from? I mean, why you? Where do these thoughts originate? Is it about reading previous crimes, or is it just you're allowing your mind to go wherever you want it to?
I think I'm just allowing my mind to go where I want it to. I mean, I didn't grow up reading crime. Of course, I read Sherlock Holmes and The Saint and James Bond and all that when I was younger. But for many years, I was studying literature with a capital L, Dickens, Hardy, T.S. Eliot, Shakespeare. And I didn't read any crime fiction until, I guess, my mid-30s when I got into Chandler and Simonal. So, it wasn't that I sort of grew up reading that kind of stuff. I did watch a lot of crime and horror on television and in movies. I mean, I was a great horror and sci-fi fan when I was younger. So, I mean, it's always been there.
And of course, you've written so many of these books now, and then the phone rings from ITV and they say, can we turn this into a TV show? There's two things then. One, it's a great honour and a privilege and there's money involved. And secondly, you've got to trust that they do a good job, because it could ruin your entire franchise if they got it wrong, couldn't it?
Well, it couldn't really, because the one thing I keep telling myself is that it doesn't change the books. The books are the same. My biggest fear, of course, was, I think, influenced by the TV series myself, so that when I was writing, I'd see Stephen Tompkinson rather than my idea of Banks, and I'd try and follow things as I'd seen them on television rather than my own ideas, but I worked hard against that, and I don't think it's happening. But I'm happy with it, really. It's they stray away from the books, because you can't cover a 400-page novel novel in an hour and a half. It's just not possible.
So how does it work then? You hand the book over and they take the bits out of it that they want to use. Is that how it works?
I think they condense it to a large extent. Yeah, I mean, they don't only take bits out, they also switch bits around sometimes. And of course, they invented their own character. I mean, sometimes it's just a matter of logistics that Andrea Lowe, who plays Annie, became pregnant, so she was out for a season. They brought in Caroline Katz to play a character that I had never even written about. And then Andrea came back, so now you've got two of them, and Banks is surrounded by strong women.
Of course, much of your life was spent in Canada. What influence did that have on you? Because, I mean, it's a very, very different place. I've been lucky enough to go to places like Montreal and such glorious people. Did that have any impact on your writing?
Yeah, it did. I mean, actually, it freed me in some ways to do what I wanted. I don't think that I could have written about where I come from and you know, life in that part of the world so well if I'd actually stayed there. So getting the distance gave me a different perspective. I mean, in some ways it was perhaps, you know, looking at it through rosy-coloured glasses in terms of the landscape and the beauty of Yorkshire. But on the other hand, you know, I could look at things like the class system, the way of life, a little bit more critically, being out of it. When you're in the middle of it, you can't see the wood for the trees.
Mm. And then, of course, you get a new book out and all the shops stock it, and there it is in the window. How does that feel, whether you're in Nottingham, whether you're in Leeds, whether you're in some outer-reaching parts of Shropshire, and there it is in the shop window? Is that strange?
Oh, it always feels great. I mean, it's like, you know, that you never get over that feeling of opening the first box of books, you know, when a new book comes out, and it's as good every time. So this week, you know, there's a new book coming out. I will walk into town, various towns over the country, and sort of see piles of them, and it's a great feeling.
And do you ever ask yourself why you? I mean, there's a million guys out there trying to write books and do pretty good jobs, but they don't have their own franchise. They don't have this string of hugely successful #1 rated books. Why you?
I don't know. I've done a lot of teaching writing, not just crime writing, but, you know, all sort of novel writing. And a lot of people have talent. You know, there are a lot of talented writers out there. A lot of them don't apply themselves enough, and, you know, they want to be writers, but they don't really want to write. One of the things I say is you've just got to do it. You've got to persist. You've got to develop a thick skin. And for years and years and years, I was going really nowhere. I was just treading water. My first book came out in 1987, and there wasn't a breakthrough until 2000 within a dry season, and then Aftermath. And the TV series didn't happen until 2010, you know, so that's a long time to be kind of just treading water out there, so it's not an overnight success.
I've asked this question to many authors and to many TV people. Why are the public so obsessed with death and murder and crime and the darkest, seediest parts of our society?
Well, I mean, you know, the answer, I think, used to be very much that in fiction, it's usually wrapped up nicely at the end. You find out who did it, the world goes back to normal, and, you know, you have a good feeling about law and order, and I don't think that's true anymore. I think people get a vicarious thrill now from, you know, being able to read it and say, you know, I told you so. They don't always get their man, you know. Bad things do happen to good people, and there's a stronger sort of theme of realism throughout crime fiction now that means that the baddies sometimes get away, and the police are often worse than the baddies.
It's really interesting when I look at your new book, which is out now. It's called Abattoir Blues. It's going to be a huge success. There's already a big buzz about it. Tell us what it's about. Don't give it away, obviously, but this story goes in which direction?
Well, it deals with rural crime, you know, so living up here part of the year in North Yorkshire, you get to hear and read quite a bit about farms in the sort of deepest isolated countryside that don't make the general news. And when my publishers asked me what it was about, I said, well, it's about a stolen tractor. And they weren't too thrilled with that response. So I said, but, you know, there are a couple of murders, and, you know, there's some really quite gruesome scenes in it. Okay, that's fine. So it's, you know, it takes rural crime a little bit further than a stolen tractor or a few rustled sheep, and it does involve a relatively large organisation with, you know, some people people who are seen as expendable. So there are murders and characters are put in danger, and I hope it's a page-turner.
It's interesting. I've got a friend who's a police officer, and one of the things I always find most fascinating about that job is we'll only ever hear about it if they don't know how it happened. If they do know how whatever happened, they never report it. So that's just within the police. It's amazing what's going on next door, especially the fact that most crime happens within the family or between a relationship. We never get to hear about it, do we?
No, that's right. And, you can imagine in some of these very isolated farmhouses, there could be all kinds of things going on that don't necessarily have to do with farming. I mean, one thing, of course, is that there's a certain amount of drugs and, people growing marijuana and hydroponically and that kind of thing. So, you just have to use your imagination a little bit and imagine that here's somebody who isn't bothered by hordes of people every day and can pretty much indulge his or her own fantasies and take it from there.
In your research, and you've read a lot, what is the thing we should be most worried about in society? Is it guns? Is it crime? Is it petty crime? Or is it drugs? Because I'm trying to work out what's the thing we should be most upset about at the moment.
Well, drugs create a desperation in people who can't afford them, and that creates a business opportunity for organised and vicious crime gangs. But I mean, I don't think that they're the danger in themselves. I mean, if they were somehow, I say, legalised, monitored, people didn't have to rob to buy them, and people didn't necessarily feel so desperate that they wanted to take them, that wouldn't be as much of a problem. Guns, I think, are a huge problem. And living in Canada, right next to the USA, which is you're always hearing terrifying gun stories about, is instructive in that sense, because Canada's gun laws are almost as strict as they are here. Not quite, but almost. So we feel very much aware of going over the border and just how different it is. So I'd say guns are a huge problem.
Is your take on drugs then to legalise everything and let it sort itself out?
Yeah, I mean, to some extent it is. Obviously there has to be some control, there has to be some sort of monitoring. And some drugs, of course, are just like very, very dangerous things to do. Something like heroin would not necessarily cause a person to act as a criminal unless he needed some and didn't have money to get it. Whereas there are drugs, hallucinogenics of some kind that can sort of send you out of your mind and, drive you crazy. So, I mean, there obviously has to be some monitoring, there has to be some sort of control. But just seem to have made everything illegal and turned it over to the criminals to handle. That's not the solution.
So here we are then, almost August 2014. This new book is out now, Abattoir Blues. When did you start it? How long did it take you to write it, and when did you finish it?
I started it over a year ago. Most books take me, 14 months to a year to write, and I finished it actually late May. So they got it out very quickly after I finished it.
How do you make sure that this book is as good as the last, which was better than the one before, without going out of your mind with some sort of narcissism and wanting to beat yourself up?
Well, I mean, it's a constant worry. It's something that constantly nags away at you while you're working on it. Is this going to be as good as the last one? I don't, sit down and think, how can I make it as good as the last one? I can only hope that the ideas I have and the way I put them together do make it as good, if not better, than the last one. I keep developing the character of Banks, keep throwing more difficult things at him, and try to make also the books different from each other, so that I'm not just repeating myself time after time. And it's a challenge. It's something you think a lot about.
I suppose you've picked a great character, because there's always going to be infinite opportunities. Things are going to keep happening that you can take in whatever direction your mind pleases, which must be very liberating. In one way, you've got the greatest job in the world, because you're the controller of your own destiny, aren't you?
In that sense, yeah. I mean, the Banks can take on pretty much any case I throw at him, and I've also got, the music to fall back on, so once in a while he can just put his feet up and listen to some interesting music.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm glad. At the start, I wasn't sure what the character was. I hadn't fully formed him. In the early books, readers would
And certainly in the TV show where most people would have seen him, Stephen gives him a certain pathos, doesn't he? And a darkness. There's a tragedy in Stephen's performance. I've felt this in everything he's done, which is so important. He's got to have empathy, or we wouldn't like him enough to keep watching.
Yeah. I mean, you have to share his feelings about things, and you have to understand what his feelings are. And TV is very different from books in the sense that you have to show that on television. So Stephen has to indicate a lot of emotion in various ways actors have of doing that. From my point of view, I can write about it. Banks can be sitting there listening to Schubert and thinking about these things, whereas on TV you have to show Banks undergoing them. So it does make for a more vibrant, intense and dramatic experience, I think.
Listen, it's been great talking to you. Peter Robinson's new novel is out now. It's called Abattoir Blues. It's another one in the long line and ongoing series of DCI Alan Banks books, which are just fantastic. So nice to talk to you, Peter. Really fascinating. Come on again, won't you?
I will. Thank you.